that food fabulous or what? Whoo! Now we're ready for summer. My goodness. So everybody could just let Brian Johnson know he could just do brisket every week for us because, that was... And Brian did... How many pounds of brisket was it? About 30 pounds of brisket, which that now gives me a sense of how much I got to cook at the end of the month for... Because our family does shepherd's door. We work with two other families, and we do the meals. We do a dinner at shepherd's door at the end of the month, and I promised them brisket. And there's about 60 to 65 there that we have to feed at Shepherd's. Shepherd's Door is a women's and children's shelter run by the Portland Rescue Mission. And so I was trying to figure out how much brisket. So I figured I was going to ask Brian, okay, how many do we have today? How many pounds of brisket? That tells me how much I got to cook. I'm stealing his recipe because that's just fabulous. Oh my goodness. And Dave was out on the grill, and Joni and Nancy and I don't know who all was in the kitchen trying to get stuff ready, and then everything was I got here at 8 this morning and everything was set up ready to go. So I mean, it was great hands-on, so thank you everybody for everything you did. I just want to give everybody a heads up. This family meeting, we are going to record it so that people who are not able to join us, so it's not being live streamed, but we are going to record it in case there's other people that need to see it, because this is the only time our vision team is going to be presenting this information to the congregation. And not everybody's here, and we got some people that are traveling and some that can't be with us this afternoon. So, but we thank you so much for sticking around. We're calling this a family meeting because this is not a business meeting. There's no business happening here. This is information that we want to share. We are going to get some feedback from you towards the end of this time together, but I do want to make sure that you know that we're not voting on anything, so there doesn't need to be a quorum present or anything like that. But this is more of, we've got some information that we want to share with you. Cindy, did you have something?
There's leftover chicken and leftover beef. And beef is in this, and the chicken is in this, and they're in the refrigerator.
Fabulous.
All
righty, so there's not a whole lot left, but there is some left. So anyway, and there goes our PowerPoint. So we're going to open our time in prayer, and then we're going to have our vision team is going to share with us. Mike Apple's going to share with us a little bit about a summary of what the vision team, the work that they did. It's been about a year since you guys did all that work. And they shared their report with Session. The beginning of this year, Session took that. They had a retreat. They've been working on stuff. But anyway, it was a chance to share all of that with you all. Then Dan is going to come and share with us kind of where the church is now by the numbers, kind of looking at, leave it to the stewardship and finance elder to talk to us about numbers, right? So that'll be Yeah, she's like, okay, fine. But we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where HPC has been, where it is now. Because all of this, the vision team process and where we are as a congregation, then sets us up for an option, a pastoral option that Presbyterian has given us, and that's the last thing that we want to share with you all and get your input on. So, hey, now we've got screens back on. So let's go ahead and open in prayer, and then Mike, we're going to let you take it away for us. So, gracious Lord, thank you so much for this wonderful day and for us to be able to come together to worship you, to be able to break bread together and now be a part of the work that you've called us to as a family. And we just ask that your Spirit be present and bless this time. May it be truly a blessing in your sight and to your name. In your name we pray. Amen.
All right. As Brian said, this is actually a condensed version. We gave a full version, several of us from the team, to Session back in January, so I'll do my best, hopefully, to remember everything we covered. But I think it's important to point out that this was definitely a team effort. There's 6 people up there who put a lot of time and effort into seeing where HPC is, where we can go, and really trying to come up with a vision for us. So we reported all that out in a report and provided that to Session, and then presented on those findings and stuff in January. So thanks to everyone on here. I was just the lucky person selected to talk today. All right, so kind of to set a little bit of a baseline, I think many of you are probably familiar with Canoeing the Mountains. We talked about it a little bit back under Bob. This was our study guide for the process. And it's a story of adaptive leadership, which is a great term, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's set against the backdrop of the Lewis and Clark expedition, so very poignant to those of us living up here in Oregon. Adaptive leadership is really all about addressing challenges when existing technical solutions won't work. And that's a very important point here, because what we're going to see today is that things have changed from the churches of old. We cannot just apply the same old technical solutions that we have been for years, because the challenges we're facing are different. So to give a better example of what adaptive change means, if you think about Lewis and Clark, well, when they started that expedition, they were 100% sure they were going to use the water route, go right up the Missouri River, hop over the mountains, get on the Columbia River, and come right down. That was the conventional knowledge by the Europeans. The Native Americans knew better. But that's how the whole trip was planned. So when they got to the headwaters of the Missouri River, went up, climbed to the top of the pass, and looked out and saw hundreds of miles of mountains, pretty much all of Idaho, the plan had to change. They had to change what they were doing in order to still make the mission a success. So that's really what adaptive leadership is about. When you take a plan that's all about rivers and suddenly you have to adapt it so you can meet your end goal. And so that's where the name comes, Canoeing the Mountains. And I think that's relative to us, because the other term I'm going to introduce today is called, we're in a period of post-Christendom. And that's very important for today, because it's a point where, because we are in this post-Christendom world, the existing challenges we're now being faced with cannot be solved with traditional technical solutions, because the rules have changed. Society has changed, the rules have changed, so the old solutions won't work. So what does that mean, post-Christendom? I don't think this is a surprise for many of us, but church is no longer the center of society in Western countries like the US. Wow, that font is really small. But if you think back to the 50s, the 60s, even the 70s, society often revolved around the church. Nothing was open on Sunday. There was an expectation you would go. That's not the case anymore. So we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about solutions, that society has changed, and we are in this post-Christendom world. But there are still opportunities, even in this world, to spread the word and to be a successful church. But what this meant is that historically, the church now has hundreds of years, well, thousands of years of solving technical problems. Oh, we can get a new pastor, we can add a new service, we can do something. That's a technical solution to a traditional problem. And nowadays, as the problems are no longer traditional, those technical solutions won't work. And so we now need to use adaptive change to actually address the core issues that we're being challenged with. I think the sermon, I'm sure, was perfectly planned to feed into this idea, but the days that there's a traditional mentality out there that, oh, we just need to attract more people. There's people out there, they just need to get the word about what HPC is, and they'll flock in here. That's no longer the case. There are not people out there on Sunday morning going, if I only knew which church to go to, I would be going. We are in the time of the nuns and the duns, and I don't mean N-U-N-S, but the people who either are not affiliated and have never been affiliated with a church, or people who have become frustrated and they're done with church. Those are the majority of people these days, the nuns and the duns. So just making our church look better to them isn't going to attract them. Those are the technical solutions that we thought would work, and they aren't anymore. So now we need to deal with adaptive change to help figure out what we can do to actually bring people in. As it turns out, even though we have a low level of people coming to church or saying they're affiliated with church, there's actually a very large movement within the population of people who want to serve. They want to make a difference in people's lives, and they want to do action. And so If you do look around and you see churches that are doing well, it's because they are actively going out and doing things. They are performing service for their communities. That's what the younger generations are looking for. So what does that mean? Basically, that means that if we look at the future of Christian churches as a whole, there's going to be, to stay relevant and to stay thriving, there's going to have to be a change. And that means we're going to have to change from a consumer church, meaning I go to church so that I can receive the word, I can be in fellowship with my friends, to a missional church. We are here to spread the word of God, to perform the great, basically go out there and to minister to the broader population and be the church out in the public in the form of service. That is where people are going, and those are the congregations that are thriving. That is the future of Christian churches as a whole. So, now that I've given you a nice background, hopefully, to tell you a little bit about what has gone on. So, as Pastor Brian said, we started this back in February of 2022 and started on a 6-month process that took a little bit longer than 6 months, working with a company called New Matrix. So this was a consultant that helped us guide through the journey. It was initiated by Pastor Bob, and he was involved for the first 4 months before turning it over to us to continue the work and to provide a summary and report to session. The process consisted of a bunch of exercises that the team did and that session did within the framework provided of New Matrix. All that information was then compiled into reports and provided to session. I'm not going to go through all of that today. Literally, as I said, this is a condensed version. Instead of an hour, you get the 10 minutes or something. So you can thank Brian for that. Ultimately, the goal of this was to answer a few questions here, which are so small I can't even read them. But they're up there. So, there we go. How it aligns with the current climate of churches in the USA. As I said, the society is changing. We are in a post-Christendom time. How are other churches successfully managing this change and handling how society is changing? And how can we take that information and apply that here at HPC when we're facing similar challenges? But to do that, we also had to do an exploration of who HPC is, how we have evolved, and make sure that when we do these changes and we look at our future, we have to stay true to the core, what we call the DNA of HPC. That's what makes us HPC, and we don't want to lose that, but we do have to evolve and change. And then when we get that firm understanding, then we can evolve and identify what our next steps are and what does that mean in terms of a pastoral search. Okay, so as I said, we did a number of these exercises that really delve deeply into our understanding of HPC, our communal history together, and what makes us HPC. And so we did a number of exercises that said, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses? What are our successes and our failures so that we can learn from them? And what are our assets and liabilities? And this is all so we could try to get to the core DNA of HPC. To the point, we even did an exercise where we tried to come up with the vision of the statement for this church in 8 words or less. So if you're used to the normal vision statements, they're a couple of pages. Now think about how difficult that is to put that in 8 words or less. But it was a valuable exercise that allowed us to really boil down what makes HPC, what do we want HPC to be in the coming years. So then within all that, within the framework of adaptive change, what do we need to do next? And so the last couple of exercises we did is some recommendations on actions to move forward, which I'll cover in a second. And then we also provided some qualities for a new pastor. If you've ever seen the pastor search process, there's a point where you have to rate the qualities you think you want in a pastor, because there's lots of variety, obviously. And so we went through that exercise with all of this in our minds. What are those qualities that we think is going to be important for a new pastor? And provided all of that to session, and then it will go to the pastor nomination committee. All right, so to jump right to the end, the recommendations, if we want to stay relevant and we want to stay a church that is thriving, we need to consider moving towards a missional church. So that means we need to perceive our existence in terms of that mission and then live our daily life in terms of that mission. During the period of change towards the new pastor, we need to be thinking and working in terms of adaptive leadership. The process, when we talk about most adaptive leadership processes, that change can be painful. That change, I mean, the reality is when we change, we lose things. There are all things that have gone away over the past few years here at HPC. And so we've lost some of that. And so there's a sense of grieving that we must go through as a congregation to get through that. And we have to do that in a way that is caring and loving to one another, but we also must do it in a way where we continue to stay the course and move towards that end goal we need to if we want to continue to exist in the years to come. And frankly, the vision team was very concerned that if we don't make change, that we will not be around in a decade. It's very important that we understand where we are and where we need to go and then commit to doing that because, as I said, things have changed a lot and we need to understand that we must change with it. And if we don't, we face losing this wonderful family we have. That's a very brief summary, but questions?
Can you define missional church?
6 months ago I could. Did it say on this one? A mission-minded church is representative, but a missional church is participant. I can't say that word. A mission-minded church perceives missions as one expression of its ministry, and that's kind of what we are. We are a mission-minded church. We keep mission at our core, but a missional church actually perceives it as the existence, meaning it no longer is the missions that we do part of who we are. It is the entire reason for who we are. That's the change to missional.
Would you give us several ideas of missions? What are some of the types of missions that Mission Church that you studied have taken?
Boy, that's a good one. I don't know, does anyone else on the committee remember any good examples? I mean, these are churches who have gone out and they're active in the community. That is their full focus. So whether that's out spreading the word, out performing services, but that's their primary focus. I do have examples, and I can get you better examples, but it's been so long, I apologize, I don't remember many of them unless you know some good examples.
I've got an example. I'll hand this to you, Steve, so you got next. But I have an example. I used this as a definition of missional church at a previous congregation. So a few years ago, I have this habit of I'm always asking Allison if I can do anything to help, right? So Allison's my wife, and we've been married 25 years, and so I'll come home if something's going on. Hey, hon, do you need any help with this? Is there anything I can help? Groceries coming in and whatnot. And it got to the point where my oldest son noticed that I was always asking if there was anything that could be done, but he was feeling guilty because he wasn't. So he comes to me and he goes, Dad, why are you always asking Mom if you can help? And I said, because I have to. And he goes, why do you have to? And I said, because I love her. I love her so much that I have to ask her constantly, is there anything I can do to help? That's the missional church. The missional church is that we love Christ so much, and it's reciprocated, that we are constantly saying, Christ, what can we do? Jesus, what can we do? What do you need us to do? It's the mindset. It's not, we're just coming to worship and receive. It's, what can we do? How can we get our hands dirty? I'll drop everything I need to do if you need me to go do this. That's the missional mindset. That's the story I like to share. And it's a different mindset. It's not come and, was I fed enough from that sermon, or was, of course, there's no judgment there. Am I getting everything that I need from this church, or, what? It's more of, I'm coming because that's where Christ has called me to come, and everything, it's not what am I doing for Jesus, it's what are we doing in the name of Jesus. That's a missional mindset. That's different than being missional, which is I come to church, I give my offering, and we support a few different missions that we feel are important to us. It's constantly, okay, this is what we do, and that's not bad, but it's also more of what do we still need to do? And the missional church is locally focused. There's global aspects to it, but the missional church needs to be locally focused. And that's where the church became irrelevant. Church became irrelevant because we were constantly worried about everything else happening in the world. And we forgot about our local communities. And so we lost relevancy. Missional church is always looking at its immediate community and saying, Christ, what do you see that we're not, and what do we need to do? That's my example. Steve, do you have another one?
I was just going to say that the focus goes from the building to the community.
Yeah. Bingo. Bingo. Okay. Greta and then who's? Well, hey, you're closer. Guess what? That's
Examples of churches in Hillsboro or Cortland that are doing a missional church.
Yes, there are. I don't have those there. I think we did we document some of those in the report? I can't remember.
any examples of missional churches in Hillsboro or Portland? Mm-hmm. I think you have it in your history. So, and to be completely honest, we're all trying to figure this out together. Being missional is something that we did really well during the expansion of the West. But then once we got parked here, we stopped doing it. So it's one of those things of, it's a skill set that we need to relearn.
So I don't know a ton about Sunrise Church, but I know, for example, in Chute Park, they provide lunches to kids for free all summer long. So sack lunches, and different groups can volunteer to be part of that. So I don't know about the church overall, but that's one of their local missions.
The other definition about missional church is that it's less about the programs and it's more about the outreach in the community.
Perhaps we've started a little bit in our 10% of our giving to missions, so we are out there, a small beginning, but we have started, so.
Yep. Fourth Sundays, yeah. Our fourth, I'm sorry, your fifth, yes, the fifth service Sunday. But then fourth Sundays is always we hear a word from our mission partners as well. But yeah. All right, I got one more over here, and then I'm coming to you, Lois. I promise. I thought you were, okay, guess what? My Apple Watch says I'm getting exercise this way.
Well, I want to call on David because when we had an available youth, and I know we don't have now, but when we went out on the streets in Portland and handed out meals, he was a big part of it at that time, and I want to give him the credit for it. But I think that's the only way you can do it is get out on the streets sometimes and just do it. I'm not much inclined to do that anymore, but I'm certainly willing to tell people that they need to.
I love it. Here we go. Go for it, David.
At Intel, we have a thing called OKRs that some of you may be familiar with. It's called Objectives and Key Results. Objective would be something that's, a high-reaching goal, like this one of becoming a missional church, right? And it's not exactly measurable. Your key result would be 4 or 5, 3 or 4 things that would be measurable and time-based, and those are the things you're trying to get done as proof that you're reaching that objective. What would be our key results for this kind of transition? What are the measurable and time-based steps we plan to take?
Yep.
That's what I'd like to ask.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. All right, we do need to move forward because we got 2 other pieces that we need to get to, and unfortunately, we have to be heading out of here by 1 o'clock because there's another congregation that comes in at 1 o'clock for their time for worship. So, if we have any other questions, I'm going to ask that you hold on to them and go to Mike directly for that. But thank you, Mike, for all that you have shared with us. And can we give the Vision team our great appreciation for the work that they did? So Dana is going to come up and share with us a little bit about HPC by the numbers. And if you want to go ahead and move, Nancy, move to her stuff, and then you're going to punch it from up there? Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
I know, I get to give you all the dry, boring stuff. I'm going to throw numbers up there, and I'll explain them, and some of you can go cross-eyed while you look at it, and some of you can absorb it. But in order for us to get a better sense of where we are now, it's kind of useful to go back and see where we were then and what kind of changes we've already made in the financial realm of things. So we're going to start with 10 years ago, 2013, which is weird that that's been 10 years.
Wow, right.
Michael McCall was in his last year as our pastor after 27 years. And this is how we looked then, and you cannot really read that. So we had 214 members. Our average attendance was 104. We had 1 full-time pastor, and our staff, we had 2 full-time and 7 part-time. And no, don't ask me what they were because I had trouble trying to figure that out. The total income that we had was $291,000. Of that, $285,000 was from pledges and offerings, and $6,000 was from rent and other. And we had $268,000 in expenses. And we didn't do here's what our net income was. But our savings at the time was $211,000. Of that, $129,000 was restricted. And restricted means it's dedicated to a purpose. I give this money so you can buy choir music. I give this money so you can build a playground. And those are the purposes a restricted fund can be used for, unless we get permission from session. Our building fund had $78,000 in it, and our unrestricted funds, which is, hey, we can spend it on whatever we need, was $82,000. Okay? Leap forward 5 years to 2018 when Pastor Bob was with us. He was hired, remember, as a designated pastor for 2 years, and then we hired him as a full-time and installed him. And there's been a lot of changes in that 5 years to bring us from 2013 to 2018. So, did you do that already? See? Sorry, I wasn't looking. Our membership was 137. We had an average attendance of 65, 1 full-time pastor, and 7 part-time staff. So, losing in the staff. Our income was only $167,000, $162,000 from pledges and offerings, and $5,000 from rent and others. But our expenses were $210,000. So way over what our income was. Our savings at the time was $220,000. $175,000 was restricted. Building fund had $69,000, and the unrestricted was $45,000. So that unrestricted was about in half. And what we have to remember is 2018, there was a lot of building expenses between this building and the manse. And it was around $65,000 that we ended up spending from the building fund and overall savings. So now we're in 2023. See, I don't even know what year it is, you guys. Our attendance is at 48. Our membership is at 83. We have, our pastor is actually part-time. He's 30 hours a week. He's not full-time. And we have 4 other part-time staff. Our income is $207,500. You did it in K's. I had to figure out what you did. Pledges and offering is $165,000, which is fantastic. Rent and other, now that's gone up quite a bit, $42,500. And our expenses around $221,000 is what we expect for this year. Our savings right now is at $146,000. $97,000 is restricted. We have $22,500 in the building fund and $49,000 in unrestricted. I mean, it's not really a surprise that we're a much smaller church than we were 10 years ago. Look at who's here now. It's just that. Looking at the numbers helps put it in perspective, but I have a really positive thing here. Our overall pledges and offerings are up 20% from last year, and I know I mentioned that when we did the pledges. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, it's the comparison there. Anyways, yeah, one more. Yeah, one more. All of you are so amazing with your generosity, and we asked if you could give a little bit more, and you all did, and that's how come we are where we are, which is a huge blessing to all of us. Attendance is up, our giving is up, and it's a positive outlook. I mean, I'm really excited for that. It's not like, oh yeah, we've got 10 people coming. We don't, we have more people, so this is a cool thing. It's a God thing. The last thing is, yes, we have another ask. And, you know, it was mentioned in the announcements, and it was mentioned in the koinonia. The HVAC unit in Fellowship Hall is on the way out. The HVAC unit over the office is out. We have to replace them. This isn't something that we can go, oh, let's, you know, save money for 5 years. We're at the 5-year point. It's going to cost us around $40,000. We were able to secure a line of credit from Synod for a portion of that. We will only draw on that to make up what we need. We will not initially take all the money that they're willing to loan us. We don't want to, we'd like to pay back as little as possible, kind of a thing. You know, I would like all of you to prayerfully consider, is there some amount you can contribute directly to this HVAC unit project? And if the Lord puts it on your heart to do that, either if you write a check, write on it for the HVAC units. If you give online, put building fund on it, and we will know what to use that for. The other thing with the $22,000 that's in the building fund, we've had a couple of unexpected expenses with our fire and safety alarm monitoring that's taken that down by about $5,000. You know, stuff happens. So that's where we are at. Thank you. You guys are awesome.
Do you have any quick questions for Dana at all?
Your eyes are glazed over.
Thank you so much. One thing that I want to bring up, and this is one of the things that I do. Not only am I your interim pastor, I also work for our presbytery, and I work with churches in transition. I also am the one who gets the phone call if a church has got a lot of financial issues they need to work through, or if they've got a lot of money and they don't know what to do with it. So I get the phone call on both ends, and that's part of the reason. Part of the reason for that is because I am a business owner. I've been an administrator. I've actually worked with large churches and been their administrative pastor. So I've got all of this history. But one thing in particular, I'm gonna back things up here just a bit to. Here we go, to 2023. I want you to look at the total income. Your total income went up 40,000 from 5 years before. And if you look at the number, the rent and other, it's 42,500. This is something I am working with every church in our Presbyterian on right now, which is if you have a facility, you need to make your facility work for you. Because let me tell you, people don't give their pledges and offerings out of a sense of obligation anymore. That generation is been going away. We give out of a sense of need. Well, nobody likes to give pledges and offerings for the electricity or for the roof or for what have you, right? They don't. Those are the things we want to give to missions. We want to give to ministries. We want to give to the work that God's doing. And so one of the things I talk with churches about is get your building producing income to pay for itself. And if you can get your building to pay for itself, then everything that you are asking for from the congregation goes to the critical mission of the church. And that's one of the things. And so your session's already heading in that direction by increasing the amount of rental income that's been coming in. Now, is that sustainable? We're going to find out over the next few years. But that is something I want you all to be aware of. That is what you're doing is you're diversifying your income as a congregation. God has given you this beautiful asset, this building and all of this property to use for God's glory. And oh, by the way, Jesus tells a parable about the wise steward, right? We're called to be wise stewards, including how do we use our buildings for our purposes in being able to take care of and pay for themselves. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention here. I'm going to flip forward here to my slides and a couple of things that I want to share with you all. One of the things we talked about this morning in the sermon was the fact that the culture's changed, right? The church today is not the church that it used to be. The culture today is not the culture that it used to be. And so there's a lot of things that have changed in the process of what it means to be the church. The vision team got into that, about the fact that we need to move from being a mission-minded church that had an attractional model to a missional church that's invitational. And so this is going to be a shift that will happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and this is a critical junction of where you're at as a congregation and going through this pastoral transition right now. Your next pastor is going to need to be somebody that's going to be more missionally minded and knows how to help foster an invitational spirit instead of an attractional model. But one of the other realities is that not only is HPC going through some changes, our denomination is going through some big changes right now as well. And this is the last piece that we want to make you all aware of, because there's a question that comes at the end of this. So let me explain kind of what's going on. We entered this pastoral transition going through what was called the traditional transitional process, which means your pastor retires, you bring in an interim pastor. Hi, how are you? I'm your interim pastor. And then I'm here until your P&C does a national search, and then they bring in your next pastor. And if you've been in the Presbyterian Church for any length of time, you know that this is how the process works, right? So, interim pastor, we're here, then a P&C is elected, a mission study is done, a national search is completed. The national search uses the national database that our denomination has, so you get immediate matches of prospective pastors that used to be in the hundreds. I'll talk a little bit about where it's at right now. But then your pastor your P&C nominates one candidate, they bring him to you, you vote on them, you install them, they're permanent. So right now, if we were to start forward in that traditional process and put the P&C online, it takes anywhere from 9 to 12 plus months. I had to put the plus in there because I was told 3 days ago at Presbyterian it's actually taking 12 to 15 right now. It's taking a lot longer. But there's some assumptions here. If you go through the traditional transitional process, there's some assumptions. If you do a national search, what you're saying with a national search is our church is fairly stable in size, and in finances, and in staffing, and in ministries, and in mission. Okay? So those are the assumptions that are coming into place when you do a national search. But we have some realities, and we've talked about these this morning, or today. We have some questions about our current stability here at HPC. Now, we talked about the fact things have trended downward in the last 10 years, but in this last few months, things have flattened out and even begun to go in a positive direction. Our attendance is going up, our membership is starting to go up, our giving has gone up. But the question is that trend going to continue? Why are we in it now? How long is it going to stay? How long is that going to continue? So there's some questions about that. Another is that what is the future staffing realities? The fact is that we don't have near the staff that we used to doing some of the work that we need to do. There's some critical open flanks here. We don't have anybody in youth and family or children right now doing this work. But we need to be looking at what does our staffing model need to be for a church our size moving forward. There's also another critical question that needs to be asked. Our presbytery has asked all of the churches in our region to consider what it might look like to be in partnership with their sister churches, especially if there's churches that are close by. Well, that's a conversation that has already started at our session level, and there are other churches that are looking into that. What would a potential partnership look like with sister churches? And would that mean some staff sharing or even pastor sharing? There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the short term and the long term for HPC, including the critical work the vision team has talked about, which is shifting our culture as a church to a more missional and invitational mindset. And that takes a lot longer than what could be done in an interim process. That takes years to do. That's not something that you come in, you bring in an interim pastor, and an interim pastor goes, hey, this is how you do it, now get going. And then I walk out the door, and you guys are like, wait, what? So this is something that having your next pastor is going to be critical. Your next pastor has to be missionally minded and also know how to foster that spirit of invitation for your future. But we have one other thing that's kind of working against us right now, and that is historically high housing costs and economic instability, which means that it's a lot more difficult on that national front of trying to bring somebody in from somewhere nationally. So because of that, those are kind of some of the dynamics that we're dealing with just here at HPC. Now, there's also some dynamics that are going on in our denomination that we need to be aware of. And the first is that there is a historically low inventory of available pastors right now. When I was working with churches in transition just 18 to 24 months ago, when they put their pastor search up on the national database, they would instantly get 100 to 200 pastor matches. These are pastors who have submitted their resume, their pastoral resume, and said, I'm willing to take a church, and I've specifically listed Oregon, and I've specifically listed a church of your size and whatnot. And so immediately the PNC has 100 or more resumes to work with. Do you want to know how many national matches they're getting right now? 0 to 24. Because all the pastors that were willing to make a move had already put their materials up in 2018, 2019, and they ended up moving before or during the pandemic. We don't have many pastors in the national database right now. And part of that is because most of them moved, they took new calls, or they decided, you know what, I'm going to stick and stay. Or they retired early, or they got burned out during the pandemic and left the ministry. So we've got a really interesting dynamic that's going on right now. And I'm working with a lot of churches in our presbytery that are like, what do we do on the national side? So we're helping them advertise and look in other places. But you're talking about historically lower pastoral movement nationally. And then when you put an economic downturn in that also kind of works against us. So there's a national pastor search that they're completely changing the website right now, and in 2 months, there's a whole new website that's going to get started, and they think it's going to take 6 to 12 months before that is up to full speed, and everybody's moved into that system. So there's a number of different dynamics going on, not just with our church, but also nationally. And so these are the things we wanted you to know. And so because of all of these realities that are in place, Presbytery has given our session an option. And that option is that we can continue to do a traditional transitional model, which will then mean a PNC and a full mission study and a full national search, which means we're still going to need to go another 9 to 12 months, or as they're telling us, 12 to 15 months. Or we can switch to a different option, a different transition option, and that's called a stated supply search. And a stated supply search would be a little different, and we need to explain what this is. The first is a stated supply search is a local search. It doesn't go in the national database. It goes on the Presbyterian website, and then we would have to also do some advertising, which I would work with the PNC to help figure out how to do that. And we've got some great places that have been getting some good information, or getting some good hits. Presbyterian and mainline denominational magazines, as well as a couple of websites. But what it is it's a local search. And it means that you don't go to a database and get a bunch of instant people that may or may not be interested in your church. What it means is you put a job posting up and you wait for potential pastors to say, ooh, I like what I see here, and I think I like Hillsboro, and I want to go interview. Okay? So it's very much everybody has to be self-referred. So you don't get quite the number of candidates, but you know that every candidate that is applying really does want to be here. The difference is that you don't need a full mission study, which takes up another 3 to 5 months of the PNC's work. The pastor would not be permanent when they arrived, though. They would be temporary. So similar to when Pastor Bob came in and he was on a 2-year contract, stated supply would allow you to come and bring them in temporary. They're on year-to-year contracts, but after a few years, if it's like, this is working and we're stable again, and we're not worried about having to cut the pastor's pay after they've been here a while, we can now make them permanent. So it does leave that option open for you. It just won't be immediate. The other thing about doing stated supply is when you put a position up for stated supply, it sends a clear message to any prospective pastors, which is, we're being honest that we don't have the stability we would like to have right now. And we're looking for a pastor who can help bring us that stability for the future. Does that make sense? So again, you don't get as many candidates. Your PNC is going to have to spend some time waiting for candidates to come in before they do their interviews, because you're not going to get national matching. But the other thing is that with a stated supply search, many times there's a lower cost, or there's cost savings because people are moving from closer to come to be where you're at. And so here's the pros and cons. A traditional pastor search has the national search using the national database, a potentially larger pool of applicants. The pastor's permanent. It typically takes another 9 to 12 months from this point in our transition. Full mission study required, assumes church and financial stability. The new pastor will move to your immediate area, maybe even moving into your manse right across the parking lot here. The search is for the church only. You can't look at sharing with another church when you're doing this national search. It's for you guys only. But one of the questions that needs to be asked about a national search is, will they understand the unique culture of the Pacific Northwest? The temporary stated supply search means that it's limited to self-referral. Your pastor is temporary to start. They can be installed later, but they're not to start. It'll take shorter, and you don't need a full mission study, but you're sending a clear message that your church is in a time of flux, and you need someone who can help lead them. But you need to be aware that with a stated supply search, a new pastor may already be living in the area, but not necessarily in Hillsboro. Take me, for example. I live in Tualatin. If I were to take a stated supply here, I may not pick up and move to Hillsboro. I may choose to stay in Tualatin until I know that that's going to be a permanent position. So you may not have somebody in the immediate neighborhood. They may be commuting here for a while. But you do have the flexibility of sharing that pastor with another church if you decide you want to do that. The one advantage is that with a local search, you may be able to get somebody who understands the Pacific Northwest culture. Now, one of the big questions that comes up is, will people be able to see our position nationally if we do just a stated supply, which is a local search? And the answer is yes. We have a lot of pastors that are looking in other places in the nation and are watching our Presbyterian website for positions to open up here and want to move here. So that may be an advantage or a disadvantage. We don't know. Okay. I'm going to leave that pros and cons. No, I said I was going to leave the pros and cons up there. But questions? And I got to grab the microphone here and do a little bit more exercise. Hold on, I'm seeing a time. Yes, we've got a lot. We don't have a whole lot of time here. Nancy.
I don't know when you came here, but I'm interested to know, are you to stay for a year and a half, 2 years? I don't know.
Oh, for how long I stay here? So as your interim pastor, I stay here until the transition's done or Presbyterian asks me that I need to move somewhere else. So typically I'm able to stay all the way through a transition. Only once have I ever been called away early. But I'll stick with you guys for as long as I'm allowed to. Okay, I saw another hand. Okay. Yes, Sandra.
I have a question. Why would somebody want to move to Oregon knowing that we were the second most unchurched state? What would their...
Great question. Why would somebody want to move to Oregon if we're the second least church state in the nation? We've got a bunch of pastors out there that take their calling seriously as pastoral missionaries, and they want to be here. Remember I told you in a message not just a few weeks ago that there have been more church plants in Portland than in any other city in America. There are pastors who are coming here to the Pacific Northwest specifically because they want to share the gospel message with an area that does not openly accept it. It is a challenge. It absolutely is a challenge. And that's a serious thing. Gary.
This is more about the culture, but this stems back to me in my high school years and being in the Army. I've noticed that the world in America has gotten much more secular, and they don't believe in sin and stuff. So I'm wondering, as you as a pastor, seeing this throughout the community, how can we as individuals go out and get people to think about God and what they need to do personally?
Great question. It's called living the gospel. Christ called us not just to believe, but to live it. That's what the kingdom of heaven is all about, right? We're supposed to live the teachings of Christ for the world to see. And that was the reason why the gospel message was to go out. And I was talking with someone, I don't have direct permission to share who this is or the context, but I just had a conversation earlier with someone who was telling me about the fact that when they were in their job in education, they could tell the kids who came from homes of faith. People know when they're around believers because there's something different about them. Something different about the way they live, something different about the way they talk, something different about the way that they actually genuinely care about you and what your needs are. Or they're saying, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom being in the hospital. Can I pray for you? Sure. You get those moments. It's a matter of just living out our faith. And I have people who will tell me that they are so horrified the fact that we are moving to a post-Christendom culture. And what are we going to do in a post-Christendom culture? And I kept telling them, you know what that means? The faster we move to a post-Christendom culture, the faster we're going to see a revival. Because that's what history has shown us. We've had 5 revivals in America since people started coming over as the new world. Every time our culture shifts away from God, there's a revival to bring it back. And so I'm looking forward to it. And I'm a younger pastor. Well, I don't know. I got some gray hair. But I'm looking forward. I'm hoping, first thing I pray for is for Christ to return. Amen? Okay, but the second thing I'm praying for is, God, I want to see that revival before you take me to heaven. Okay? So I'm not scared of a post-Christendom culture. I'm all in for it. And I'm like, bring it. And I'm going to help every church I can move to that more missional front. Because that's when the gospel becomes even more impactful. And that's why your next leader is going to be so critical in who you bring in. Great question, Carrie. Sorry, I got a little excited here. I'm preaching again. Any other questions? Does it make sense, the option that Presbyterian is giving us of doing a traditional search, traditional national search, and just, if we want to, we stay that course. That's the course we're on right now. So we can stay that course. Or do we make a switch and go to the stated supply route, which means they can move a little faster and get going and it has some flexibility. Those are the two options that are here. Is that, huh? Great question. Who makes the decision? The session. Your session makes the decision. And then they ask Presbytery for permission. And so what happens is Presbytery has already come back and said, the session can make that call, but they said, the session in their wisdom said, we want to talk to the congregation, and we want to share this with the congregation first. Does that make sense? We're going to take just an informal poll, just so that the session has that for, I saw your hand up. No, okay. Oh, you're holding your hand to your ear, okay. They want to hear everything. I'm sitting there going, we've got a retired PC USA minister here. Maybe he has something to share here. So, okay, we're just going to throw this out. There's nothing binding about this at all. But from what you've heard, and knowing that that the session has two options, if the session were to come to you and say, what option do you think we should consider? Should we stay the traditional route or should we go this stated supply route instead? What advice would you give to the session? So we're going to do that, congregational preference poll. And again, this is not binding. This is just so that the session has a sense of where the congregation might be on this. Yes, sir.
Is there any drawback to the second option?
Stated supply?
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
wonderful. What's the drawback?
The drawback is you're not doing a national search, and you are not going through the system which allows you the most potential pastoral candidates that you can get.
Okay, so we could be going along with the flow 6 months or a year before we decide to change.
No, the decision would be, we're getting close to a point where we need to fish or cut bait.
Yeah.
Okay, so the session's going to need to make a decision sometime this summer of, do we stay with the traditional model or do we go stated supply? And that's because we got to get the PNC fired up, and we've got to let the PNC know which direction they're going. So we've got to take some steps here. So, Dave?
Do you have a sense if there are a number of people that are interested in looking in locally here?
So that's the interesting thing. I can tell you 3 churches that I'm working with in our presbytery that all did stated supply searches, and it took 3 months, and then all of a sudden they were like, hey, we got enough candidates to interview, and they did, and they were really happy with the selection that they got. A year ago, it was all dry. But what's happening is that they're getting people that are in the area that are saying, hey, I would really be interested in this. But they're also getting people from, well, actually, I'm not allowed to mention the church, but I've got one church that we're working with that, I don't know if the candidate's being presented this Sunday or next Sunday, that's why I'm hesitating, but their candidate came from Kansas. And they ended up having people that applied from North Carolina and Florida, and then there was one other state back east. Because what's happening is, one of the things we're recognizing is that you've got a lot of these empty nester pastors whose family is back here and they want to get back here to be close to family. And so they're looking for a church that they can go and work at while also being closer to family. Or they're saying, Oregon is where I want to be when I retire. Like a certain someone who really loves still working for the hops, right? It's going, oh, Pacific Northwest is a good place to be, and I like this church. This might be a great match. So you never know.
So if people can see it nationally,
Yep.
or opening, what is the difference then?
The difference is that we're not using the national database with a full mission study and getting instant matches, which used to be in the hundreds, haven't been lately. It's been in the 1 to 2 dozen. But that could pick up. But when you don't use the national system, you potentially lose out on dozens and dozens of potential candidates because they may not be looking for you. The national system is a very passive system. If you're open to taking a new call, you upload your PIF and you wait for churches to get a hold of you. That's how that works. And so you don't always get the pastors who are actively looking and saying, I want to go to this location, right? Does that make sense? But in the business world, this is how it works, right? We're used to that. So it's kind of, there's advantages to staying in the national system and doing a national search, but then there's advantages to the local side. There's going to be, and that's why with the pros and cons, you kind of look at both and go. The other piece is that it's not permanent, and some pastors will shy away from that. If it's in the national system, they know that's a permanent call, they'll go. But somebody coming across the nation for a temporary call that in a year or two, is that church going to remain stable? Are they going to be able to pay me what they promised to pay me in 2 years? Now, I'll tell you one thing you have to your advantage, and that's the manse. Churches that have a manse are have historically got a better turnout of applicants because of the West Coast. I'm sorry? When housing was more affordable here, then the manse was like, yeah. But now that it's, not only is it expensive, but how do you even find an apartment or a house? How many of us have family members that have been struggling to find housing?
Isn't there currently somebody living?
There is currently somebody living in there, but they said they'll stay in there until it's needed. So they know.
Brian, it just occurred to me that Michael McCall, who spent, more than 20 years here, I think. Yeah. Came from Valley Church in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking about having somebody local who knows the area, just a thought.
Yep. Well, we're past 1 o'clock, and our friends from our next Spanish congregation have not yet arrived, so that's why I've kind of been like, okay, but I'm letting this go. So I'm letting you keep asking your questions, and then when it looks like we got people coming in, I'll just do the informal poll. Greta?
Shared history of sharing congregations, Orinco and Hillsboro shared for a while.
I remember hearing that in your history, yeah. And there's a lot more churches that are doing that now. They'll do a couple of stated supplies and put them together for full time. So, maybe a little larger church and a little smaller church. So there are options there. Did you all know that I was only 30 hours? Did you know that I wasn't full time? Yeah. Okay.
So, Brian, the other thing with the national search is there will be moving expenses.
Yeah.
We're talking minimum 15,000, probably more like 20 or 25,000. That comes out of our pocket to move the new pastor and his family here.
Yeah.
That is an obligation we have to take.
Whereas a stated supply search, that cost is significantly lower, and there's not that expectation of full. Because in a national search, the expectation is the church will pay for all of the pastor's moving expenses and even help with a deposit or something for temporary housing. So that's why I had mentioned at the beginning that there's usually a much lower bar. Steve?
If we decide one way or another, can we change our mind later?
Yes, as long as Presbyterian lets you.
So it's a possible.
It's possible, yeah. We can start down one road. If we don't like it, we can switch. We can ask to switch. Yeah.
I'm wondering, is it just PCUSA pastors, or if they were interested, or are we RCA or anything?
Great question. That is one advantage of doing the state supply search, is that you open the supply to any of our mainline colleagues that we're in full communion with. So United Methodist, RCA Reformed Church of America, the LCA Lutherans, and the UCC, Congregational. And we are seeing some people pastors from those other traditions that are coming to the Presbyterian Church, especially out of the United Methodist and the RCA the RCA Reformed, because those two churches are those denominations are going through splits right now. And so there are some pastors that are going, I got to get out of my tradition, and I need to be somewhere where it's more stable. Well, we know what that's like. We went through that in 2008 to 2012. So that's a decade behind us, but now we've got some of that stability, and some people may be wanting to come over. Whereas the national system is locked into PCUSA only pastors. Great question. So again, this is not binding. This is just, we're giving our advice to session. Okay? So, but I do want to go ahead and pose the question. so that the session that is present here can kind of see, what do you think might be a better option for us? So you need a minute to think about it? I only point over here because traditional, I started over here when I said the traditional model, and then I shifted over here to the stated supply. I'm going to be really scared if all of a sudden you all vote for traditional and you all vote for stated supply, and I'm going to be like, what did I do? How did I mess that up? Any final questions before we, yes?
What's the difference in the time frame for bringing in a pastor? Is there a noticeable difference?
Yes, if we do the stated supply route, we'll be able to have the PNC actually have the advertisement up by the end of the summer. So you would be beginning that search pretty quickly. And it's typically 3 to 6 months at that point. So you could have your new pastor by the end of the year or the beginning of 2024. If we go with the traditional model, we're probably looking at, I'm guessing, February or March before we're into the new system with the mission study completely done and starting to get applicants, and we're looking at next summer before pastoral candidates may be coming in for neutral pulpits, if we even stay in the 9 to 12 month time frame. And as I'd mentioned, with the new system going online, it could take a lot longer. Lee?
If we do stated supply and there's not a mission study, what do they base the recruitment on where they usually use that mission study information?
Great question. Because the vision team did their work, the Presbyterian is going to allow the vision team report to stand for us. And all we have to do is add a demographics component, which I'm picking up I'm getting the report later this week for our session. So all we need is the vision team report as it is with their recommendations and the demographics report, and we're done. Great question. Yes?
And if we stay with the traditional, that means you could be staying on for another year. It's going to take longer.
Yeah, so yes, there is that.
There is a chance.
But my job is to tell you, you need to take me completely out of your equation. You really do. You need to be thinking about what is best for the church long term. And I know that that's hard. I know that you all know that I've actually absolutely grown to love you all here. I would love to stay for as long as I can. But my job is to do the work that God's called me to, which is working with churches in transition and to get them through the transition the best way possible. And if that means that there's a process that takes longer, but that's what's going to be best long term, then let's do it. But if there's a process that is shorter, but that's going to be better for the church long term, then that's what we need to do. And you got to take me completely out. Because here's the thing, I can't stay with you all. The moment an interim pastor walks in the door on the very first day, they can never be considered for the permanent position in any form. Okay? And that's the work that I do, and I've been doing it for 15 years. That allows me as an interim pastor to be a truth teller. I can come in and be an honest reflection for you of where you're at and where you need to go. I never have to worry about, if I say this, will they want to keep me as their permanent pastor? Or if I say this, are they going to run me out the door? Right? I have to be honest. It's what I'm called to do. And I never take into consideration how long I'm supposed to be at a place. I'm supposed to be here as long as God wants me here, and then I have to go. It's the Mary Poppins effect, I've been told. I just, when the Holy Spirit changes the wind and it's time, I got to go. So.
I understand what you're saying, and I really wasn't asking the question for it to be funny. I just
Yeah.
thought you sort of have to stay here until someone new comes in the traditional.
Most of the time, yes. Most of the time, yes, unless Presbyterian comes to me and says, we have an emergency, we need you here instead. So like I mentioned, I did get pulled out from one church 7 months before they had their new pastor because of that. So there's always that risk that I get pulled early because of something that's extenuating circumstances, because I am the most trained and seasoned interim pastor in our presbytery. So sometimes I don't get to pick where I go. That makes sense. All right? Okay, it's 1:15. We need to be done. We had a wonderful meal. This has been great. You've given us so much time. So let's go ahead and just do this informal poll. I'm going to ask first for those who think that their recommendation to the session would be, let's stick with the road we're on and stay with the traditional model and just go ahead and move in that direction, or do we give recommendation to the session that yes, consider going the stated supply route and consider that as an option for us moving forward. All right? Hold on, got to fall over here. It's that brisket starting to get to my head. Time for a nap. All right. For those who feel that they would recommend to the session to stick with the traditional route, traditional transitional model, and go for national search, would you please raise your hand? All right. For those who would recommend to the session consider going the stated supply local route, please raise your hand. And for those of you who are truly undecided and have no idea, raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. And like I said, this is non-binding. This just, the session needed to know, and that's why they asked for this family meeting. So now you guys are all up to date. You know all that's been happening with the vision process and the great work of the vision team. You're up to date of where the sessions, the work that they've been wrestling with during this transition time. And now we're going to say, all right, Lord, guess what? This is your church, not our church. We're just blessed to be in it. And we are going to close with praying that God clearly lead this transition forward. Amen? Let's do it. Gracious Lord, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for this chance to come together, to break bread, to be family, and to, hey, let's have a frank conversation. Well, we recognize that this is your church, and you are already working in the heart of our next pastor. We just don't know who they are, and we need you to show us. But we also know that you're a God that works through human processes. And sometimes we have to figure out which process are we going to use. So, Lord, we pray for you to continue to work in the minds and the hearts of our session and in our presbytery. And if the way forward is clear, that we can move forward with this process and that you will begin to work in the heart of that pastor and get them ready for coming to be our next pastor here at HPC. But guess what, Lord? We're going to leave this at the foot of your throne as we do everything else and ask you to answer our prayer according to your will. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you, friends. Thank you so much.